Manitoba has a really strong case to make that we've got a very credible path to net zero.
And Manitoba's premier says his province can handle that path to net zero alone, asking for an exemption to the federal carbon tax a day before it's set to rise. Welcome to Your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Also on the program this Easter Sunday, Pope Francis leads Mass in St. Peter's Square. We'll tell you about his message for the world. We'll also tell you about some good eggs in Quebec.
It feels very reassuring that you're not alone, that there's somebody there.
How one group is making sure seniors have company and conversation this Easter. Manitoba's premier is hoping to get an exemption from the federal carbon tax. Wab Kinew says his province has its own plan to lower emissions. The price of carbon is set to go up tomorrow, as it has every year since 2019. And that means some things, like gasoline, will be a little more pricey. The federal government is under pressure to scrap this year's increase from politicians who say Canadians just can't afford it. Marina von Stackelberg reports.
Filling up at the gas pump tomorrow will cost you an extra 3 cents per litre. Heating your home will be more pricey too. This year's annual carbon tax hike comes after months of pressure on the Liberal government, especially from provincial premiers who say cash-strapped Canadians can't afford the increase.
We have to show that we're going to be flexible. We're going to keep life affordable.
Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says his province doesn't need Ottawa's carbon tax.
Manitoba has a really strong case to make that we're going to hit net zero without a consumer-facing carbon tax.
Instead, Kinew says Manitoba wants an exemption like BC and Quebec already have. Those provinces brought in their own carbon pricing programs that meet or exceed the federal carbon tax. Kinew says Manitoba will present Ottawa with its own plan, which he says can meet the bar, in part because of hydropower.
We have effectively decarbonized our electricity in Manitoba, and that's true today.
Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says Ottawa is all ears.
Where provinces and territories are prepared to come forward with their own plans to put a price on pollution, we are very, very keen to work with them.
The federal government says the carbon tax encourages people and businesses to switch to cleaner energy sources.
Who's ready to axe the tax?
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre rallied against the carbon tax again this week in Winnipeg and met with Premier Kinew.
As for the Premier's view on the April Fool's Day Trudeau tax hike, he can speak for himself. He's more than capable, and I'm happy to work with him and anyone to bring home lower prices for Canadians.
The federal government does offset the tax by sending Canadians rebate checks. Those will also increase tomorrow. Ottawa says 80% of households get more money back than they pay.
This issue has become quite polarized, and I think there's fault, frankly, on both sides.
Christopher Reagan, an economist at McGill University, says the Liberal government has failed at explaining the carbon tax to Canadians. And he says the opposition has falsely argued it drives up inflation.
But the other thing is that they're not really proposing alternatives. The reason why over 300 economists at this point have signed an open letter talking about their support for the carbon price is because it's viewed as not only an effective way at reducing emissions, but the lowest cost way to do it.
Reagan says since Canada brought in the carbon tax in 2019, greenhouse gas emissions have fallen by more than 5%. Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
In Baltimore, at the site of the bridge collapse earlier this week, debris is finally being removed. Hundreds of workers are part of the cleanup effort that's now running 24 hours a day. But officials warn the sheer volume of debris means it may be a long time before it's fully cleared away. Katie Simpson reports.
With a steady hand and a lot of force, highly trained workers are using power tools, an exothermic cutting torch to be exact, to shear through twisted metal debris strewn across Baltimore Harbor. It's a slow and dangerous operation. The steel girders that once supported the Francis Scott Key Bridge are being cut into smaller, manageable pieces and hauled away using cranes and barges.
This is going to be a very complex process. There are even now forces acting on that steel, so it takes a lot to make sure that it can be dismantled safely.
U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg says despite engineers working around the clock, it is still too early to say how long this cleanup is going to take. The short-term goal, for now at least, is to remove debris from one specific area, the north end of the bridge. Maryland Governor Wes Moore says once that happens, it will create the space needed so that more highly trained work crews can join the wreckage removal effort.
This will eventually allow us to open up a temporary restricted channel that will help us to get more vessels in the water around the site of the collapse.
Once this happens, it may also make it easier to resume the search for the bodies of the missing victims. Of the 6 construction workers who were killed when the out-of-control cargo ship struck the bridge early Tuesday morning, only 2 have been recovered. Captain David O'Connell of the U.S. Coast Guard says the conditions are too dangerous for divers.
They've scanned all the safe areas outside the bridge debris and as close to and inside the bridge debris as they can. They just don't feel it's safe anymore because the places they need to go, they can't get to.
The federal government has promised to cover the upfront costs of the cleanup and the rebuilding effort while providing $60 million in immediate aid. But there is only so much the feds can do without approval from Congress. Baltimore's mayor, Brandon Scott, a Democrat, is pleading with lawmakers to put partisan politics aside when it comes to approving future support.
This port is the #1 port for cars and farm equipment. So this matters to folks in rural North Carolina, in Kansas, in Iowa. This matters to the global economy.
Any potential political fight remains in the background for now, as the immediate challenge of the cleanup effort itself is so consuming. Katie Simpson, CBC News, Washington.
Pope Francis presided over Easter Mass in St. Peter's Square today before a crowd of 30,000 people. He also delivered his traditional Easter message to the world. Francis called for a ceasefire in Gaza, the release of hostages held by Hamas, and for an end to the war in Ukraine. The Pope's appearance took place amid growing concerns over his health. For more on this, I spoke to Megan Williams in Rome. So, Megan, this week has been the most significant week in the Catholic calendar for the Pope, and today were the final Easter events, but it seemed touch and go that he would even be there, right?
That's right. For the past weeks, he's really limited his schedule and had other people read his speeches or homilies at events and masses. The Vatican says he's been suffering from the flu and bronchitis, but he actually looked pretty good on Thursday. That's when he read the full homily during the Holy Thursday Mass and after he washed the feet of 12 female inmates in a prison outside Rome. But then at the Good Friday Mass, he seemed very tired. He was in a wheelchair. He didn't say much. And a few hours later, he was supposed to be part of the Way of the Cross procession. It's this candlelit procession that goes to the Colosseum. But the Vatican sent a message canceling his participation at the last minute. And in the statement, it said that he needed to rest in order to make it through the next day events, today's Easter Mass and his speech.
Okay. Well, he did lead the Mass today, and then he gave his address on world politics. And what stood out for you on that?
He spoke out against war in general, but addressed first the most worrisome conflicts in the world right now, those in Gaza and Ukraine. He called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and that humanitarian aid get through. He also called for the prompt release of the hostages seized on October 7th. Then with Ukraine, he called for a prisoner swap between Russia and Ukraine, which many observers are likely to feel wasn't enough.
Yeah, and he has come under criticism over what he's said or hasn't said about that conflict, right?
He has. Since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine more than 2 years ago, the Pope has shied away from naming Russia as the aggressor, which has disappointed and angered many people. Then in an interview released earlier this month, he suggested Ukraine should have, quote, the courage of the white flag, which many people, including Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky, interpreted him as saying that Ukraine should surrender to Russia. The Vatican rushed to clarify, saying that the Pope meant Ukraine should agree to a truce and negotiate with Russia, which kind of equally puzzled many political observers.
So, a bit controversial, a bit contradictory. What's been said about his positions on Ukraine?
Basically, that unlike his two predecessors, Benedict and Pope John Paul II, Francis doesn't have a strong grasp of Russian and Eastern European history and politics. I mean, let's not forget this is a pope who grew up in Argentina. He has a deep grasp of European colonialism in the Americas, but that he doesn't seem to understand the Russian invasion as being a different kind of colonial aggression. And part of that may come from what is now likely an extinguished hope that he had, that he would somehow bring the Roman Catholic Church closer to the Russian Orthodox Church, whose patriarch is an energetic apologist of Russian leader Vladimir Putin. But either way, many observers say Ukraine seems to be a weak point for this pope.
Okay, Megan, thanks so much for the update.
Thanks, Stephanie.
That was Megan Williams in Rome. In Jerusalem, tens of thousands of people marched outside Israel's parliament, calling for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's resignation. Protesters clashed with police, lighting bonfires and briefly blocking a highway. It's the latest show of anger against the government over its handling of the war in Gaza. The demonstrators called for elections and say Netanyahu has failed to bring back the hostages still held by Hamas. Meanwhile, Netanyahu reaffirmed plans to launch a ground assault into Rafah in southern Gaza. He told reporters there is no victory over Hamas without entering the city. Over 1 million displaced Palestinians are sheltering in Rafah. International humanitarian groups and many of Israel's international allies say a military offensive there would cost thousands of civilian lives. Still ahead, how Nike's update to the English soccer team's jersey has become a political football. The change to the St. George's Cross that everyone's talking about. That's coming up on Your World Tonight. Rooming houses are now legal across Canada's biggest city. For years, illegal multi-unit dwellings have operated across Toronto, which sometimes put desperate renters at the mercy of unscrupulous landlords. As Philip Lee Shannock reports, the aim of the new regulations are meant to increase the supply of safe and affordable housing.
Since I came to Canada, most of my life I live in a rooming house because as a student, the cheapest way to live is to share.
Bee Lee So has lived in many rooming houses over the years, first as an international student, then when she was working survival jobs.
For low-income people, the only place you can afford is rooming house again, right? And that's where I live.
While she says some landlords were good, others rented rooms that had unsafe and unhealthy conditions. And if she had a conflict with the landlord, there was little recourse. One locked her out of her room, another physically assaulted her.
She owed me money and she don't want to pay. And I said, you have to pay me back. You don't pay me back, I will not move. I will not leave. And then she dropped me. Physically, I was hurt.
Now So is a tenant advocate and says allowing rooming houses to operate legally means landlords will have to comply with safety and other building codes in order to be licensed by the city.
With the legalization, as a tenant, we don't have to be afraid to complain to the tenant board. And then also that will force the landlord to keep up the condition of the place, right?
Karen Andrews is a lawyer with the Advocacy Centre for Tenants Ontario. She says homeowners have historically pushed back against allowing rooming houses outside of downtown.
Because, the suburbs were these great, homogeneous, affluent, pristine places, and we don't want that here. And all the research is now indicating that there's a lot of poverty in the suburbs. And it's really about time that we look at safe, affordable housing. This is an option.
Right now, the existing rooming houses are the most affordable housing available for single people.
Joy Connolly is an affordable housing advocate. She's concerned the high cost of upgrading properties, as well as a cap on the number of rooms, may not be attractive to rooming house landlords, and that could result in fewer options.
These housing operators have been working under the radar all the time. So for them, that might just be what they continue to do until they are eventually discovered. And then they might sell.
The city is offering to subsidize landlords to help them make improvements as long as they commit to keeping rent affordable. Philip Lishanok, CBC News, Toronto.
An immigration case in Winnipeg involving a former lecturer at a Chinese military school is raising questions about the integrity of Canada's borders and concerns about foreign interference. Wajie Zhu faces a third immigration hearing after a federal court judge found problems with a previous decision. Karen Pauls explains what's led to this.
Videos for the People's Liberation Army Information Engineering University show rows of people in military uniforms at laptops, learning to fly drones, controlling satellites and telecommunication systems. The university is affiliated with 3PLA, a Chinese military academy teaching cyber warfare, says Wesley Warwick. He's a senior fellow at the Centre for International Governance Innovation in Ottawa.
This is a famous unit, the People's Liberation Army, well known for its cyber attacks and espionage against the West.
Federal court documents show Wajie Zhu taught at that university for 16 years. Zhu would be highly skilled, says Christian Leuprecht, who teaches political science and economics at Royal Military College and Queen's University.
Anything from propaganda operations to subversion operations, sabotage operations, and espionage operations.
Now 43, Zhu also spent 2 decades in the People's Liberation Army. His wife, also former military, moved to Winnipeg and sponsored him to join her. When Zhu arrived as a permanent resident in 2021, the Canadian Border Services Agency detained him, saying he was inadmissible and a danger to the country.
His claim, of course, is I didn't have anything to do with these cyber attacks. I was just a military instructor.
Warwick says there are many red flags.
He retired from the Chinese military at the ripe young age of 38 with a fairly senior rank, lieutenant colonel. His employment between 2018 and when he came to Canada in 2021 seems unknown.
2 immigration hearings have determined he can stay in Canada, but the federal court has ordered a 3rd hearing to determine if he was an actual member of 3PLA. Zhu's lawyer says he can't comment without permission from his client. Warwick says the issue is bigger than this one case.
Can Canadians have confidence that their immigration system is working to protect them against threats from cyber espionage, foreign interference?
In Ottawa, the Foreign Interference Commission is holding hearings into meddling allegations and how the Trudeau government responded to them. The United Kingdom and United States have also raised concerns about Chinese hacking.
A clear pattern of hostile activity originating in China.
Accusations China denies. Leuprecht says top-secret CSIS reports show Canada is one of China's targets.
Canada is quickly emerging both within the Five Eyes community as well as within the broader alliance as the weakest link.
John Schindler says the Zhu case, amongst others, is concerning.
This is frankly outrageous. I want to know why he was ever let in the country in the first place.
Schindler is a consultant and former analyst for the U.S. National Security Agency, who has also briefed the White House on security issues.
Any threat to Canada almost automatically becomes a threat to the United States.
Schindler says border security and continental defense is a growing problem between Ottawa and Washington, one that needs to be taken seriously by Canada. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Winnipeg.
Some English soccer fans are calling a foul on their national team's new uniforms. The shirts feature an altered version of the St. George's Cross on the collar with different colors. Designer Nike now says it's a tribute to England's World Cup winning team from 1966. But some fans, former players, and even politicians call it an insult to England's flag. Lauren Sproul has more.
For this first international at Wembley.
The England men's soccer team took to the pitch in a match against Brazil last weekend, wearing the uniform that, for the last week, has been all anyone can talk about.
Nike, some stupid reason.
So I don't know what that logo is.
Not the cross for England.
The white uniform, or kit, as it's called in the UK, now features a colourful adaptation of St. George's Cross on the back of the collar. Nike has changed the traditionally red and white flag, making it blue, red and pink instead, enraging fans online and even former England players.
It doesn't need fixing. What's next? They're going to change the 3 lions to 3 cats. Leave it alone.
The UK's Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also spoke up.
My general view is that when it comes to our national flags, we shouldn't mess with them.
Analysts say the Prime Minister and other senior politicians weighing in on a seemingly trivial issue has less to do with their interest in football and more about winning votes ahead of this year's election.
I think politicians are, at the moment in the UK, keen to capitalise wherever they can on ways in which they can appeal on populist type things, such as sport. The types of thing that gets the person in the street a little bit angry.
Dr. Stuart Wigham is a senior lecturer at Oxford Brookes University who specialises in sociology and politics of sport.
So the English football team in some ways is one of the main vehicles for the expression of English national identity. When something like that is deemed to be under threat by a particular element of society, that does create a furor. But what's interesting about this circumstance is that there's been numerous plays on the England flag in the past with England kit.
Some say the issue with this adaptation of the flag has to do with its similarity to a variation of the transgender pride flag.
Sort of a vague, sort of pridey type look.
Former footballer Peter Shilton aired his grievances with the uniform on the BBC.
The colours, it's a little bit woke, I think.
Some out and proud members of England's 2S LGBTQ+ football community find this fleeting comparison and extreme reaction disheartening.
I think the scary thing is there's no part of the St. George's Cross on the Nike kit that they've brought out that is relating to the LGBTQI community.
Mikey Connor is a semi-professional Football League referee and a member of the LGBTQ+ Professionals in Football collective.
Can you just imagine for a moment if there was an England player in the squad right now who is maybe gay, who is maybe bisexual, so you can think how they must be feeling.
Nike have disputed any intentional connection to the trans pride flag and said in a statement that their hope was this playful interpretation would inspire and unite players and fans alike around the game, which is exactly what it did for Connor.
Come June, when England's walking out onto the pitch, I'll be supporting them. It doesn't matter what kit they're in, they're my team.
Lauren Sproul, CBC News, London.
People have been seeing strange things over Dawson City, Yukon. Great balls of fire streaming across the night sky. No one is quite sure what the objects are. Meteors? Comets? ETs? Chris McIntyre investigates.
Naomi Gladish was walking her dog just outside of Dawson City when she saw what at first appeared like a bright star.
Within a fraction of a second, I realized that it was actually moving quickly. And then as I watched it, like a second later, it grew a long tail.
Then things got weirder.
It started changing color, like getting much brighter, and then changing to like a pale blue, kind of like a gas flame blue.
Gladish says whatever it was traveled across the sky for about 7 seconds before it appeared to burn out. But she says it didn't end there.
Like about a minute or two later, I heard a really loud noise, but it was fairly soft. Like it wasn't a close boom. It was a very, very distant boom.
Jeff Delisle was closer to town when he saw it. He posted on social media that something flew right over his head. He shared that he too heard the boom. Nobody knows for sure what the unidentified flying object was, but astronomer Krista van Leerhoven is pretty sure of one thing. It's not alien visitors.
If we were being invaded, we would know. It would be very hard to imagine them getting here and not doing something dramatic enough that we would actually know about it.
Van Leerhoven is president of the Yukon Astronomical Society. She has contacted Gladish and Delisle through Facebook to ask about what they saw. She says what they described doesn't sound like a meteor.
But meteors, as a rule, are a consistent color. What these people were describing had different colors. So the head looked blue and then the tail was more of an orange. And that's just something that doesn't happen with meteors.
According to Van Leerhoven, those changing colors could point to a man-made explanation.
Space junk, when it comes through the atmosphere and starts glowing, that can be more irregular because of the variety of materials that go into a spacecraft. The other thing it might be is a very fast plane.
As for the boom sound that both people heard, Van Leerhoven says the object was likely moving so fast it broke the sound barrier. She says whatever it was is a reminder of the countless wonders in the night sky.
There's a lot of things that happen semi-regularly that are absolutely glorious to behold, but you need to be looking up in order to see them.
Chris McIntyre, CBC News, Dawson City, Yukon.
You are listening to Your World Tonight from CBC News. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can hear Your World Tonight and other CBC radio programs wherever you are on your favorite podcast app. For many Christians around the world, Easter is a time for family, an opportunity to get together and celebrate, to share a meal and visit loved ones. But for many people, including some senior Canadians, holidays can feel lonely and isolating. One Quebec group is trying to make sure that doesn't happen. Kwabena Oduro has their story.
For Easter this year, Diane Lewis is sharing a meal with some new faces. Her children are spread out all over the globe from Tennessee to Sweden, making this day emotional.
Lonely, sad, but you know they say if your kids move away from you, it's because you brought them up right, because they don't need you. But it's hard. It's really hard.
The 82-year-old says those feelings reached new heights during the pandemic, so she decided to take action. She reached out to Little Brothers, a group that provides support to seniors aged 75 and older across Quebec.
I love it. It's warm, it's supportive. It feels very reassuring that you're not alone, you know, that there's somebody there.
According to Statistics Canada, about 1 in 5 Canadian seniors aged 65 and older reported experiencing loneliness in 2019 and 2020. Senior women are more likely to experience being lonely than men. Last November, the World Health Organization declared loneliness a global public health concern. Penny McCord is the chairperson of the Action for Reform Residential Care Association in British Columbia.
And I think a lot of older people aren't connected to social media, and I think many people, older people, are a little bit poorer than they were too, and things are a little bit more expensive, so there's less money to spend on things.
Smile, Little Brothers Montreal volunteer Michelle Cousins says, with the situation getting worse, holiday brunches like this one are more important than ever.
It reminds them that they still matter to someone, that they're not forgotten, that people want their company, want them to share in a festive meal, in a group gathering.
For 83-year-old widow Janet Bruxup, it's more than a meal. Her children also live abroad.
So it looks like a small group, but it's really a community, a family. It's very nice. I love it.
Although Diane Lewis is enjoying herself with friends, she's worried about other people in her situation with nowhere to turn.
There are a lot of people who are alone, and there are a lot of people right now who are home and wish that they could be with someone.
Little Brothers is hoping to expand their services across Canada so more seniors are able to do just that. Kwabena Oduro, CBC News, Montreal.
As part of the Confederation Jubilee Song Contest, this is Willie Arsenault from Kelligrews, and it's called Rub-a-Dub.
That's a sample from a song contest held in 1974 in Newfoundland. It's part of a CBC report found by our colleagues in the St. John's archives. The provincial contest of the time was to mark 25 years of being part of Canada. The entries celebrated the Union,
Confederation, 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 you made of what we are,
and the rock.
I'm a Newfoundlander, and I'm proud to say, on this little hunk of rock, I was born and raised in a little town called Botwood, a seaport on the coast.
And the prize? Well, that was something special, explained CBC St. John's reporter Bill Mitchell.
Aside from the fun involved, there's a $1,000 first prize, and who knows, perhaps in immortality,
thus far reserved for the musical authors of The Squidjiggin' Ground and Eyes to Buy.
Eyes to buy that builds the boat, and eyes to buy that sails her, and eyes to buy that catches the fish and brings them home to Liza.
Today, what is now Newfoundland and Labrador marks 75 years since joining Canada on March 31st, 1949. The province is celebrating with grants, scholarships, a new license plate featuring a Confederation 75 logo, and medals to people who have made significant community contributions. We'll celebrate with another one of those Newfoundland classics that Bill Mitchell mentioned. This is Great Big Sea, covering the traditional folk song, Eyes the Buy, on your World Tonight. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Happy Easter if you're celebrating. Good night.
She could take was up to her knees in gravel.